Hey all, so I just got done watching Star Wars The Last Jedi, and I have to say that this film is a bit of a mess, and I'll kind of break down as to why. So, to start, this film basically takes place immediately after um, The Force Awakens, and that's a bit of a problem because you kind of need that gap in between films for a lot of the characters to develop. And they tell you how things develop sort of in the crawl when you do the original trilogy. And even back when you were doing the prequel trilogy, you had this gap in between where there was a lot going on. You had the development and growth of the characters going on sort of off screen, and it was important that that happened. Uh, so for me, it was very important that they kind of have that time in between, but instead, no. This takes place right after. Now, another problem that I have with this particular film is that they try too hard to be funny. A lot of this seems like it's writing by committee, so it feels like too many writers have had their hands in this, inserting jokes in. And that ticks me off because you never had to have scripted jokes in any other Star Wars movie, but instead this one's trying to be practically a comedy mixed in with all that drama. Now, unfortunately, a lot of that feels too shoehorned in, and that's part of the problem for me. Nothing should ever feel that shoehorned in. If you have to force a joke in where it goes nowhere, does nothing, and adds nothing to the story, you have a problem. So another problem with this film is that they have too many stories going on at once. And this was something that Red Letter Media kind of broke down in a lot of the analyses of the prequels that Mike Stoklosa did. So, with the original trilogy, you had the different stories going on. You had the one at the very end in the climactic battle, and throughout much of the story, where you had basically everything kind of following Luke in terms of the story. You didn't have it really divided up too much. When you got to you had the story of Leia and the story of Luke meeting Obi-Wan and Han Solo and all these other characters. But it was mostly just those two stories. You didn't follow a whole bunch of other stuff. And the editing for the original Star Wars was saved at the last minute largely because originally they had Luke shown down on the ground watching the battle from the farm, and they had him going out to the outpost, the Tachi station, to hang out with his friends, so that we kind of saw that. And it's like, well, wait a minute, we were following this space battle, so what's going on with that? And it was too much of a disruptive thing. And you had a scene shoehorned in where C-3PO was driving the land speeder. And so an unnamed editor who Lucas actually fired for re-editing the film to try and be a little bit more succinct at the opening, actually ended up saving the film because apparently test audiences just hated the film. And without that first successful film of A New Hope, you wouldn't have had the successful franchise that we know. Now, when you get to Empire Strikes Back, you have multiple stories there, but they're all kind of tied in together. You have Darth Vader pursuing Han Solo and Princess Leia, and you have Han Solo and Princess Leia who are on the run from the Empire. So that's tied in together closely enough that it's mostly a a single story in that right. And then you have Luke down on Dagobah being trained by Yoda. And it's for a certain amount of time. We don't know exactly how long this is going on for, but we can estimate that it's a number of days at least. It may even be up to a week, but it's kind of amazing that, you don't really know how long it's lasting for. And you're just keeping track of those two stories. And even when you get to Bespin and Cloud City, you're really only keeping track of two stories at the climax, which is you're following Luke when he's confronting Vader, and you're following Leia and Lando after Han has been frozen in carbonite. So you're still following just two stories, and that makes it a lot tidier. So you don't really have to keep track of too much stuff going on with too many new characters introduced. Alright, now for Return of the Jedi, they do kind of get a little bit more complicated. You have Luke and Vader and the Emperor, the space battle going on outside with Lando and the Millennium Falcon, and, Admiral Akbar and everyone. And then you have the battle down on the ground with the Rebels, the Ewoks, and the entire legion of the best troops. So you've got three things to keep track of going on there for the latter half of the film, but for the early part of the film, you really just have one story, and then it breaks up into two stories briefly, where Luke goes back to Dagobah to complete his training, and you don't really have to follow Han and Leia as they rejoin the Rebel fleet. You're just following Luke for that little bit. So you have pretty much one contiguous story where not too much else is going on elsewhere. It's all kind of happening around the same space, for the most part, with those characters. It's only when you get to the very climax that you actually have to follow more than one thing. Now, I won't bother breaking down the prequels accordingly, but because this new trilogy is a continuance from the original trilogy. It doesn't involve a whole heck of a lot from the prequels. So I'm just looking at these kind of on their own as a standalone set of films, but tying back heavily to the original trilogy because that's where they're trying to kind of source a lot of the love for, if you follow. So with The Force Awakens, you're mostly following just the two stories. You're following Finn and you're following Rey. You don't really follow Poe, and that's why when Poe suddenly turns up, it's a bit of a surprise. Oh, he survived. And it would have felt better to me if we had had some indication of that. It's one of the reasons why I don't actually like The Force Awakens. I think there was a lot of bad writing and directing going into that. Anyway, so you have mostly just a couple of storylines going there with Rey and Finn. Finn and Rey. That's it. Those are our two characters. And you might think, oh, well, you just don't like a black stormtrooper, or you don't like the main character in Jedi being a girl. It's like, no, that has nothing to do with it. I'm perfectly fine with having a female Jedi and having a black stormtrooper. I don't give a crap about that. You know, a character can be any color, they can be an alien, it doesn't matter. Alright? I want to see their character develop. And one of the problems that I have with Rey is that Rey doesn't really develop as a character from what I can tell. I don't get a sense of her emotional development as a character. With Luke, he starts out a frustrated and naive farm boy who thinks that he can kind of take on the world. And, you know, he feels that call of destiny that Joseph Campbell talks about. in his talk about the monomyth. So you have the sort of ingenue character who starts out very naive about the world and is changed along the way, and that's the protagonist. So, by contrast, Finn, you do see a little bit of a change, but the change kind of happens at the beginning, and then he just has one beat, which is that he is a coward. And he keeps getting knocked unconscious. And that's about it. You don't get the sense that the rebellion or the resistance or the Republic are good. You don't get a sense of the good that the Republic is doing. You don't get a sense of anything. You don't get a sense of what the New Order is doing, for that matter, or the First Order. You just don't get a feel for whether or not these people are evil. In A New Hope, you get that immediate sense because these stormtroopers are occupying Tatooine. They're stopping traffic to ask for identification, and they're slaughtering Jawas. They're slaughtering these nomadic scavengers that roam around the Jundland wastes of Tatooine. You have this sense of this imperial order being forced upon everywhere, even small places, and that they're coming into bars and shaking up the place, and that they're constantly just looking at what's going on, and that you're living in a fascist state. It makes sense. But then you have what's going on here, which is just, it's the First Order, and they have a ship, and they have a whole bunch of ships, and they're coming and landing, and they have stormtroopers. And it just doesn't feel quite as oppressive of a force. Supposedly, the First Order has all these planets, but we don't get to see them. And supposedly the Republic has all these planets. And I will admit, they tried to sort of backpedal a little bit in The Force Awakens and talk about, because I watched it the other day, and they said, we're going to destroy all the planets in this one system. Because apparently that one system is the capital of the New Republic. And it's like, well, that would mean something if I actually knew anything about it. Or if I actually knew anything about what the Republic was like, for that matter. But instead, you don't get a sense of any of that. You just get, there's the Republic and the First Order and the Resistance. And that's it. So you're just brought back in, and all of the familiar stuff is supposed to be enough of an establishment. And I'm sorry, but it's just not enough. So enough about everything that's built up to this. Let's actually talk a bit about The Last Jedi. This film, you have to keep track of basically 3 storylines. I already talked about how painful it is that they had to really shove in some jokes, and I don't know why. I think maybe they thought this story was too dark and maybe too upsetting for the little ones, and I'm like, it's the middle of the trilogy. The middle of the trilogy is always naturally the darkest, and it's why it's one of the best. When you did Empire Strikes Back, Irvin Kershner knew what he was doing in making the story as dark as possible. And he put in little jokes that just come organically. Han Solo was fed up with C-3PO chiming in with needless prattle all the time, and so he covers up C-3PO's mouth, or holds up his finger and tells him to shush. Or they even switch him off at one point, because they're just absolutely fed up with 3PO as this sort of nattering nabob. But when you get to the actual story, it's way more enjoyable. In this instance, you just basically have the three stories revolving around Rey, who is on this island with Luke Skywalker, and then you have the Imperial fleet with Poe and Finn, and a new character who's an Asian woman, presumably of Chinese descent. I don't know. But, I'm just about the actress's ethnicity, not the actual character. The character is just an Asian American person who happens to live in this galaxy far, far away. Well, they had Asian-looking people in the regular trilogy, so it's not a big shock. And given, she's actually a good character. And spoiler, she dies. Or at least she seems to. I don't know. Maybe she falls unconscious. They leave it open. But it ticks me off because they're introducing a lot of new characters, and those characters then die. And it's like you're introducing characters and you're making them very interesting and compelling, but then you're not having the payoff. Okay, so the new character, I don't know her name. The sound was really bad when I was watching it, but basically, I think her name is Ho, maybe, or something like that. Ro. I'll just go with Ro, but anyway, the point is, she goes with Finn and BB-8 to this Vegas planet. And the whole point is that it's like Monte Carlo or something where there's lots of gambling. And at first Finn is like, oh, isn't it glorious here? Everyone's so nicely dressed and there's all this food and money and games. And then she quickly shows him that, no, it's not actually that nice because you have cruelty to animals because they're racing these animals. And they prod them and beat them and stuff. It's like, oh, so we're going to get a little bit of animal rights, huh? Well, that's nice, but that's a little bit too soft and rounded in the corners for even Star Wars. I mean, just because it's meant to be a family film doesn't mean it's meant to have safe round corners. I mean, this is the film that in its very debut had stormtroopers off screen slaughtering Jawas. And then, as soon as Luke returns home, he finds his aunt and uncle destroyed, burned, and just a cinder. He finds his homestead destroyed, leveled to the ground. Okay? That is the darkness of this empire. And we're supposed to just be like, oh, well, the First Order's mean. But, and, they'll shoot people, but, you won't really see the death or whatever. It's trying too hard to have the soft, rounded edges. And you really have to have those sharp corners in order for it to be a threat, if you follow. Anyway, so you're following Finn and Ro in this Vegas city, and this is after they somehow contact the woman who ran the bar from the Force Awakens, and they're somehow able to have a conversation with her while she is in the middle of a battle. Now, this would make better sense if we could see what was going on her end. But she's actually shooting in the middle of a firefight with other people, and it's like, oh, why aren't we seeing that? Then it would at least make sense. Then, hey, this is interesting. But instead, no, we just see this little cartoon woman in a hologram somehow talking, and we're somehow able to see her blasting off with a jetpack. And it's like, wait a minute, that's the movie I want to watch. I want to watch her in a battle with whoever, blasting off with a jetpack, and I want to find out what the heck's going on here. Well, you never get to find that out, and it really ticks you off, because it's like, I could be watching a better movie. So, you've got that storyline as your second storyline, and then as the sort of background story that everything is hinging on, the Rebel fleet has left its base, which, I don't know, somehow the First Order knew where that base was. Don't ask me how. But they are... The Rebel fleet's evacuating its base, the Resistance is evacuating, and they don't have very many ships. I'm like, what? Okay, first off, how does the New Republic not have like 1 million ships that it is then using to retaliate? The New Republic somehow had its entire government and all of its fleets taken out by having one system destroyed in the first film. That does not make sense. Okay? So somehow there's no New Republic. There are no more ships in the New Republic either, because one system was destroyed. Yeah. Anyway, so as a result, the Resistance is down to nothing but table scraps. They have one Mon Calamari cruiser and a few little support vessels, and I'm like, how? But anyway, getting away from all that, they're trying to escape, and the First Order shows up. And I don't know why they have to call it the First Order when they could just call it like the New Empire or the Empire Remnant. There were books written about this. There was an entire saga written about all of this stuff before Disney bought this and decided that they were just going to wipe out all of that stuff and be like, nope, we're going to write a whole new thing, and all of that stuff that came before it is no longer canon. And it's like, but this was approved Lucas canon. Nope, not anymore. We don't want it. We bought the rights to the name and the characters, and we bought the contracts for the actors. We didn't bother actually saying we were going to do anything the way that the fans actually want. So, yeah, Disney is not being very good with the property. They're just trying to make whatever they can to kind of make the money. But basically, so the fleet gets away, and somehow they're tracking the fleet. And it's like, what? Okay, then, destroy the tracker. But no, instead, they have the fleet flying away at sublight, burning through its fuel, and the whole idea is, oh, well, somehow they'll, burn through all their star fuel, and, so it gets really frustrating at that point. So, long story short, Laura Linney is introduced simply so that she can die. Laura Linney's character is like this admiral who ends up doing this really stupid, desperate act that is ultimately kind of pointless. And it's super frustrating because they introduce a really good character, played by a really good actor, just to sacrifice herself. This kind of crap did not happen in The Empire Strikes Back. I'm not kidding. You had one character introduced who died shortly thereafter, and that was Dak. Dak was introduced as a sort of foil to Luke, who represented kind of where Luke was at one point. At one point, Luke felt like he could take on the whole Empire himself. Anyway, so that's really the only character that we get in The Empire Strikes Back who is there mostly to die. I mean, he's there also to just sort of be there for Luke, but really that's all he does. There aren't too many characters who do it otherwise. I think uh, General Ozzel or Admiral, yeah, Admiral Ozzel uh, is there, and he dies, but he's Imperial, so it's not quite the same thing. In this film, you get a few characters who wind up dying, and it kind of ticks me off, to be honest, because it's less satisfying when you have characters constantly dying. Uh, Now, in the first film, when they're aboard Starkiller Base, and I'm saying the first film is in the current trilogy, uh, you have Han leading the attack on Starkiller Base, and okay, well, that kind of um, makes some sense, sort of, not really. Um, and I don't know, he ends up dying, and it's sort of now I think, oh, it's supposed to parallel back when you had Ben dying aboard the Death Star, and it was really upsetting because he had formed this mentor relationship with Luke, just like Han had formed this mentor relationship with Rey, except not really. There wasn't a mentorship there. Oh, and one of my biggest complaints about The Force Awakens that I should mention at this point, why the heck did they drag BB-8 out all over the place? Han is like, oh, I gotta have him out here for collateral. No, you can hide BB-8 away because everyone's looking for that droid, and then nothing is sticking out or suspicious. And when they go into the bar, they take BB-8 with them, and it's like, you know darn well that everyone is looking for that stupid droid, so don't take him in the bar with you. But no, they go ahead and they take BB-8 in the bar. Anyway, so getting back to The Last Jedi, because I've kind of gone all over the place now. When we're talking about this film, it's important to sort of talk about where Luke is, because he's really the focal point of that part of the story. The Finn and Rose subplot, which involves Benicio del Toro for some reason, who's supposed to be kind of a Han Solo character, and you really want to kind of like him, and it's like, oh, okay, cool, Benicio del Toro is going to be in this trilogy, and he's going to be the Han Solo character who helps them get in because he's a smuggler or something like that. And it's like, well, you're in for disappointment there, because he turns out to be a total opportunist and turncoat and has no interest in supporting the rebellion or the First Order or anything. So forget it. But the other half of it is with Luke. He's kind of turned his back on the Force and cut himself off from the Force because he doesn't want a lot of the shame and responsibility. He feels like the Force misled him when it came to Ben Solo, who, of course, we know now as Kylo Ren. So, yeah, you get some crap between Kylo Ren and Snoke, and it's not very satisfying. And I can see exactly what the writing process was. They wanted to kind of do an inverse of how everything was. So they took some of the different elements of The Empire Strikes Back and they shuffled it around. So first they have escaping from a base that was soon going to be under siege by the First Order or the Empire or whatever. Bad guys. They're coming and they're going to seize this base and kill everyone, right? Well, then it ends with an assault on a hidden base that's in a cave. So they basically just took the parts with everything on with everything on Hoth and just split that between the beginning and the end of the film. And then they took the Cloud City thing and they really, really reduced that down to its bare components. Where we're talking about, oh, well, they flee to this little place that's very beautiful, but it has a dark side to it, just like Cloud City did. And they think they find someone who's a friend, but he turns out to be an enemy. So they're literally just rehashing everything. And it's in a way that's not making a compelling story. And instead of having this character that they think is going to be their friend turn out to be a turncoat, only to have him come back around at the last moment, he's like, no, I really don't care about any of your crap. I'm going away now. I have money, and I have my ship, and I have no reason to help you whatsoever. You know, my butt is taken care of, so goodbye. And it is so disappointing. And you also think, oh, well, there's going to be this really cool thing happening with Snoke, because Snoke is this bad guy, and he's like the Emperor, and he's going to be taken out in the third part of the trilogy. And it's like, well, I realize that with the original trilogy, that they were kind of making a lot of it up as it went along, but at the same time, it still had a sense of a complete story from beginning to end, so that you felt good about where it ended. With the first one, you don't feel like you're satisfied with any of it. So, I don't know what exactly they were, in fact, going for with a lot of this, but Snoke ends up being killed by Kylo Ren. And that is so frustrating, because you're dealing with such garbage here. It's like, okay, so wait, he couldn't even come near Snoke, and then Snoke is now dead. Because Kylo Ren used a trick with his with the lightsaber that was next to Snoke that they confiscated from Rey. And then the guards attack, and Imperial guards are supposed to be like next to impossible to beat, and these are supposed to be as good as Imperial guards, and yet Rey and Kylo Ren take them out. And even though it's like a tough fight, it's not compelling when, you know, they win. And it's just so frustrating. So, at this point, you know, I'm really dissatisfied. But then, there's another, you know, Finn and Ro, I think it is, get caught while they're going aboard the Emperor's flagship, which is this giant flying wing. And the whole idea is that, oh, well, if we take out their transmitter that's tracking us, then we'll be able to get the fleet away. And this has been the plot for the entire film at this point. We need to take that thing out. And it's like, well, why don't we just, you know, find wherever they're tracking us from, and then we can get away. You know, wouldn't it be simpler just to find something within our own fleet that they're tracking and take it out? I don't know. Because unless there's some kind of thing that I don't know about, that seems like the simpler way to go about it. Anyway, so they never end up doing it. And that leaves you so unsatisfied. But then on top of that, Laura Dern ends up taking out the taking out the Emperor's ship by turning around, setting the hyperdrive, and basically flying into it. I'm like, why weren't you doing that to begin with? You had smaller support ships that fell by the wayside, and you could have easily gotten them aboard the Mon Calamari cruiser and had the smaller ships do exactly that, set their course, and do a kamikaze run or whatever. And just, it's so frustrating because I'm like, why? Why are we doing it this way? None of this makes sense. Someone compared it to Mad Max Fury Road, where you've got like the 3 different bad guys who are in this big horde that are chasing after this one lone vehicle and everything. And I understand the comparison, and it kind of works for that particular story arc. But my main issue with this film is that it is just so unsatisfying. In this one, Luke dies. And he doesn't just die, he goes out Yoda style, where he just sort of fades and becomes one with the Force by pure conscious will. Now, that wouldn't be so bad, except it's at the very climax, and it's obviously so that he can kind of come back as a Force ghost. Now, they do have Yoda come back as a Force ghost, and I like that. That was a good little thing. And he comes back kind of to tell Luke what he needs to hear at that moment of crisis. But at the same time, I'm not really satisfied. I just don't feel like this is as good of a movie as it could have been. And a lot of it is because they tried so hard to make it funny. And they tried so hard to make a lot of the other stuff so dark and gritty. And then they tried so hard to make other stuff so transcendental and challenging. So, one part of the film that is clearly trying to borrow from Empire is when Rey goes into the cave, just like Luke went into a cave, and they have an experience. So, instead of Luke encountering Darth Vader and there being something about destroying him, and it turns out that he's destroying himself if he gives in to that, well, then, in this one, Rey just sees like a million copies and then sees a reflection of herself, and then you just don't get the sense of there being as much of a change here. With Luke, before and after he leaves the cave, he completely changes. He suddenly understands. And he understands that a lot of it is he has to choose the path. It isn't just about being righteous. It isn't just about wanting to do the right thing or being the best. It's about choosing. But the other part of it that's so frustrating is that there is no clear point to it. Her journey through the cave just is there to look cool and be interesting and be speculated about. But in the end, it doesn't seem to really mean anything. It's just meant to look cool and be weird. And that's a problem. So, yeah, how would I rate this? I mean, I don't rate The Force Awakens very highly. I think I gave it a 2 out of 5. Or somewhere in there. This one's actually more of a disappointment in a lot of ways because they had some good build-up with the first film. And then they had Rogue One, and Rogue One managed to be a better Star Wars movie in almost every way. even though it had not one Jedi, it had like a Jedi apprentice, a Force-sensitive person who believed in the Force and everything. And you had so many good characters in Rogue One. And it wasn't a perfect movie, no, but it was better than The Force Awakens. And that's really the issue here. So looking at this and knowing that this is their main storyline, and knowing that they just took elements from the first trilogy and the second film in the first trilogy, and they just decided to rehash it around and shuffle it, and like they wrote it on index cards and then shuffled it around until it formed something that they could make a cohesive plot out of, that frustrates the hell out of me and makes me really disappointed. And there was so much room here. There was so much potential. And they are actually, in my opinion, kind of killing the franchise with efforts like these, where you can sort of see the strings, as it were. You know what I mean? I mean, when you're watching a puppet show, part of the beauty of it is you don't see the strings. You don't think you're watching a puppet. You think you're watching a character or something like that. Here, it feels like you can see the machinations of the writers, of the producers, of whatever committee wrote this thing and produced it and decided, oh, well, we need something cute shoved in, so we need to have a cute little, like, creature that basically looks like a Pokemon. And that's exactly what that little fur thing is. It's meant to be the cute little thing that's like a Pokemon. And it's so frustrating. I don't know what to make of this thing. As it stands, I really don't recommend it. And I hate to do this. I really do. But I can understand why Mark Hamill was like, this film is going to suck. Okay? He was saying, this film is going to stink out loud. This film is going to be lousy. And Hamill knows, he studied this stuff. He was one of the first people to start speaking about the relationship between Star Wars and fantasy in terms of Joseph Campbell's stuff, and in terms of the nature of Jedi as being related to wizards or paladins or some other similar character, a character with a higher cause and who's in touch with a deeper magic that people have forgotten about. So, Hamill has spoken out about this and was saying very early on that, this is not going to be a very good movie. And I'm forced to agree with him. Because I'm looking at what they did with the writing by committee and what they wanted to shove in and all of the stupid jokes. I am not even kidding. One of the first spoken exchanges revolves around a dumb joke where Poe is like flying his X-Wing in front of the Dreadnought, the Imperial Dreadnought, this big scary ship that they describe as a fleet killer. And he says, yes, I have a message for the General. And he goes on and says, like, it's a message from Princess Leia, and I'll hold. And it's like, wait, what? They have call holding in this galaxy? And then, yes, it's a message about his mother. It's like, wait, so you're throwing in misogynistic humor. In this film that is supposedly very empowering for women, you're going to throw in misogynistic humor at the beginning. And so much of this film does not develop the strong female characters that it sets up. You even have Captain Phasma brought back because she was such a popular character. Along the lines uh, Boba Fett, honestly. You had that much intrigue around Captain Phasma. And it's just so disappointing because, spoiler, Captain Phasma dies. Yeah, Phasma's like in some kind of duel of the fates with Finn, and Finn beats Phasma, and then Phasma winds up on some deck plating that the whole ship, that whole part of the ship is burning, and the deck plating gives way, and Phasma falls, presumably to her death. And I don't know, they'll probably bring her back because why not? But damn it, that's just so frustrating because it's like you bring her back for approximately 2 scenes. I'm not even kidding. It's like 2 scenes. One is Finn and his sort of sidekicks capture, and the other is for their execution immediately following, and the duel after the ship is blown up. But it's all like one contiguous set of scenes that are all part of one little part of the story. So I'm just looking at this and I'm like, what is going on with this crap? What is this garbage? You bring her back just so that after we barely get any of her, and you're just going to throw her away like that. And you introduce a character like Laura Linney, who's supposed to be this great admiral, just so that you can have her do a suicide run on the Imperial ship. And it just keeps going like that. It keeps going like that, where these characters are dying and these characters are thrown away. And you cannot simply introduce a character solely to have them die over and over again. You can't keep killing off characters that you introduced in the first film simply for the purpose of killing them. It doesn't serve the plot. Okay? Having all of these characters die does not make the story more dark somehow or more edgy. Because, oh, well, Rogue One had all these characters introduced who died, and people loved Rogue One. I swear that has to be the thinking at this committee. So, I think that's the reason why there are so many characters that are brought back simply so that they can die. It's like people liked Snoke, right? People thought Snoke was compelling. People thought Captain Phasma was compelling. You know, and they're just like, oh, well, we're just going to have all kinds of characters die because it worked for Rogue One. Guess what? Rogue One was a one-off. And with Rogue One, it was part of the story that those characters die after we meet them, and it was just kind of essential for it. Not because they didn't want to bring the characters back, but simply because it was meant to be a tragedy. And the whole point of having Leia there at the end and saying, oh, well, this is going to lead directly into A New Hope, it works. It works to have those characters lost. In this film, it doesn't work to have all those characters die. It doesn't work to have all those characters lost all of a sudden out of nowhere. You know? So, I'm trying to think of how exactly I want to rate it, because I don't want to rate it so ridiculously low that it somehow feels like I hate it. But honestly, what is there to love about this movie is the more important question. What exactly are we supposed to love about The Last Jedi? And the answer is there is virtually nothing to love in this. I mean, you talk about Empire Strikes Back, there is loads of stuff to love. You can love Tauntauns, you can love the Imperial Walkers and the little speeders that attack them. You can love the Wampa as this scary snow monster, this abominable snowman. You can love the Millennium Falcon being a hunk of junk that they can't keep working and everything. You can love Yoda and R2D2 getting gobbled up by the monster and spat back out and flying through the air. You can love Cloud City and Lando Calrissian, played by the excellent Billy D. Williams. You can love, the even the Ugnaughts and Cybot and everything in that Cloud City thing, and you can love that it's so beautiful outside, and then they have this underbelly that's like hell, where it's all dark and red. And you can love the ending where Luke gets his hand back, and he can feel with it, and it's almost like a real hand and everything, and it's beautiful. And there's still a sense of like, oh well, yeah, things are down, but they're not necessarily out. There's so much to love about Empire, and even with Attack of the Clones as the middle chapter, I felt a little bit better about the trilogy, with all of that going on, because it kind of felt okay. I didn't love it, but I didn't completely hate it. And I didn't say, what is there to love about this? Because there were parts about Attack of the Clones that you can actually enjoy. Geonosis alone has so much to love. Camino has a lot to love about it. Those are pretty cool sequences and scenes that they have taking place for those stories. The story arc of Obi-Wan trying to solve this mystery and going to different places to try and get clues and everything. Well, it works. But this one, there is no sense of mystery. There's no sense of a chase. There's bad guys are brought back simply so that they can be killed. Good guys are introduced simply so that they can be killed. And that does not work. That doesn't make the story compelling for anyone. It doesn't make it a compelling story. And I think the main crux of this film, the main burden, is that you had a writing process where they were trying too hard to make everything work. And when you have so many rough, unpolished ideas, and you don't have just like one or two writers working on this and really developing it and really making an awesome story out of it, and it just feels like they're shoving in too much stuff because it feels good, I have a problem with that. And I have a perfect example to finish off with. So in the middle of the Las Vegas sequence, like, they're trying to make it like it's Monte Carlo or Las Vegas or something, but it's basically, that kind of thing. So our heroes are captured, and they're held basically in the Hippodrome, where these creatures are kept. Well, they introduced that as kind of a Chekhov's gun, where if you introduce one thing in the first act, it has to be used by the second or third act. Well, since this part of the story takes place in this one city, they have to use it before they leave the city. So they use that these wild animals are captured and used and tortured and mistreated. And they're looked after by these little ragamuffins, these little children that live in that area. I think that's where the one character kind of grew up, is the idea. But getting away from that, they decide that, they're going to release all of those animals, and they're going to run through the city and disrupt everything so that our heroes can get away. Okay. Well, for some reason, some of those animals run through solid walls. And that's a bit of a problem for me, because they're running through solid walls. Animals do not run through solid objects. If they see a solid object ahead, they maneuver to avoid it. You do not see a rampaging horse or bull run right through something that they cannot see through. They'll bust through a fence because they can see through the fence. They are not going to run into a solid wall that, just looks like whatever. Because they're not stupid, even in their rage. So, okay. They're doing that, and before the animal busts through the solid wall, you have a focus on a teacup sitting on a table, and then they pull away to show, after they show that it's shaking, to show, oh, well, this is what's going on. And it's like, why are we focusing on the teacup? No, I understand that it looks cool, but why are we focusing on this teacup? It does not lend anything. That teacup was never introduced in the story, so us finding out what happens with it doesn't lend anything. It's just something cool that we're focusing on because it's random, and it's in the scene, and it's mixed in, and see what a world we're building? Another example of this kind of crap is later on. The, Finn is sneaking aboard with the sidekick and with the code breaker that they find, the rogue type guy, who, is sneaking them aboard, and they're trying to infiltrate this ship so that they can shut down this device. Okay. So, what now? Well, we're going to cut to this object landing and shooting steam, and it has an Imperial symbol on it, and you're going to think that it's some kind of spaceship, and then they pull away, and it turns out to be an iron, and that they are ironing garments. And so our heroes steal uniforms from this ship's laundry. And it's meant to be kind of a sight gag. And at that point, it's an immediate screw you to the audience. It's like, oh, you thought it was this cool thing, and it's just an iron. And it's like, okay, why is that important? Why are we focusing on that at all? And you might say, oh, well, it's a different generation of directors and producers, and they're telling the story in their own way. And I'm like, okay, but if you want to make it a Star Wars film, there's a certain point that you have to take your own license and pull it back and say, is this good storytelling? Am I focusing on the necessary stuff? When I talk about Chekhov's gun, it's an important aspect of storytelling. Because, okay, I tell this story a lot as an example for educational purposes. Chekhov was a famous playwright, and a lot of people wrote him letters about how to improve their scripts, and they would often send him scripts and ask for tips. This would usually be personal friends or students who were asking him for favors, and so he wrote several guidelines in a book and wrote it all down and sent it out as a publication for people and be like, stop writing me. Here's all my advice. Anyway, so one of his suggestions was, if you introduce a gun or a sword or a teacup or any other object in the play, for the purposes of the storytelling, it needs to be used in some fashion. If you introduce a teacup in the first act and saying, oh, bring me my favorite teacup, by the second or third act, something needs to happen with that teacup. Like, maybe it gets accidentally broken, and that introduces one of the main conflicts. During the second act, oh, well, you broke my favorite teacup, and that was a harsh gesture. Or maybe the person is so mad about the betrayal or or something not going their way, that they smash the favorite teacup themselves. Chekhov's gun says that if you introduce an element like that, it needs to be used. If you're bothering to focus on it and give it that much attention, you need to use it. It cannot simply be there for flavor or for building up the imagination or the setting. Okay? So the idea is you've got a gun that's hung on a wall. Maybe it's hung above a fireplace. It doesn't matter. By the end, something needs to happen with it if you're bothering to call attention to it. You can't just say, oh, look, I got this new gun and I'm going to hang it up on the wall. And then people are wondering, well, what was going to happen with that anyway? Was that just left on the in a previous draft? Oh, no, nothing happens with it. It's just there because it's lending flavor. It's like, no, it's not. It's wasting time. It goes nowhere and it does nothing conducive to the plot. You have to have elements to the story that are introduced so that they resolve themselves. All right? So, with all of this focusing on random crap, it doesn't help anything for the actual storytelling. So when we look at this teacup, yeah, we know that teacup's going to be smashed in a second, but where was that teacup earlier? Okay, we're focusing on that iron. Is that iron going to come back into the story later? No, it doesn't come up later. So the writers and the directors who are doing all of this storyboarding crap don't bother to respect rules of good storytelling. And you might say, oh, well, why does it have to be this way? Why does it have to be good storytelling in the way you're talking about, Claudia? Well, it's not that it's like anything that I'm so bent out of shape about where, oh, it has to be this way or it's not good. It's a matter of these are guidelines, these are heuristics, rules of thumb, if you will, that help make a story compelling. They help make a story good. Otherwise, it's a shaggy dog story. And by that I mean a story that starts off somewhere, rambles on, goes in different directions, and sets a lot of things up, but doesn't actually resolve anything. Think of Lost, that long-running series that got kind of interrupted by a writer's strike and then came back from the dead and then kind of just resolved itself. But it turned out not long after the series was finished, the writers actually said, oh yeah, we were just making it up as we went along. We didn't have any idea what any of the different plot devices were. We just introduced stuff at the end of episodes to make it compelling, and then we really had no idea where we were going from episode to episode, so we just went ahead and came up with BS to fill it in. But we have no idea what those things actually do. We didn't base it on science at all. It was just a soap opera. And that revelation ticked off more fans of the show than anything. Because, it was like, you really went ahead and just BS'd your way through several seasons of this show when you could have actually put something together, put a little effort in, and tried. And that's kind of what this feels like. It's like you're just going to introduce characters, you're just going to have them grow close and love one another, but in a very asexual way. And there's no sense of passion, there's no sense of loss, there's no sense of desire. And honestly, that's what I kind of feel like with a lot of this. There's no sense of anything lost. I don't feel like Leia or Finn or Poe or Rey lost anything in this. I don't feel a sense of what's at stake if they lose or win. At best, the Empire's going to kill them. Well, I don't have any emotional investment in these characters. I don't feel scared for them. You know? There's no sense of gravitas to any of this. There's no poignancy. So when I talk about rules around good storytelling, I'm really talking about how to make the story matter to people and how to make them feel satisfied with the endings that you're giving, all of the little story arcs that you're giving. If you have a character introduced simply so that they can die a couple of scenes later, it doesn't work. So they introduce Laura Linney's character just so that she can die. They reintroduce Captain Phasma just so that she can die. They reintroduce Emperor Snoke just so that he can die. And it just keeps going like that throughout much of the show. It's just one character dies, then another character dies, then another character dies. Luke dies. And in the end, it's not a very satisfying resolution for a lot of these characters. You know, they're making their way off in the Millennium Falcon, and Carrie Fisher, God rest her soul, is aboard this, and this is her last film. Apparently she filmed some scenes for the final film, and then she passed. But this is going to be her legacy. This is her last film that she's going to be in, and this is going to be the last appearance of this brilliant woman. And it's in this really bad movie. And there was hope. There was a lot of hope for these films. From me, from everyone, we were all really hoping. Like, oh, okay, Disney's buying it so it'll have all of the budget that it needs. You know, look at what Marvel was able to do with making the stories at least compelling and interesting and funny. And I'm just so hurt. So, I mean, where to go with this? My recommendation is don't see it. And I hate to say that. This is the hardest thing I've ever had to say in the years that I've been doing this show. Do not see it. Don't see The Last Jedi. Don't bother with The Force Awakens. I'm probably not going to bother seeing the last film. And it has nothing to do with the characters. It has nothing to do with the special effects or anything like that. It's just the fact that the writing and direction is just awful. And I don't feel like the producers respect the audience anymore. It feels too artificial. It feels inorganic and over-contrived. It feels like it was produced way too much by committee. And it hurts to watch it. And I can honestly say that. You know, I told people, yeah, you can watch the 2016 Ghostbusters Answer the Call, right? You can actually watch that. You can, like, skip over mentally a lot of the crap. And you still have a kernel of a good story there. But with this one, there is no really good story there. I mean, here's the thing. You could actually produce this film and have only 2 storylines in it. And you would not need half of the crap that you're doing. Okay, here's how I would rewrite it. First off, okay, you got Rey on the planet with Luke. That's perfectly fine. You can leave in all of the Luke plot the way that they ended up resolving it. I can deal with that. You can have the fleet on the run, but you have to have a different way of going about it from just they're escaping at sublight And for some reason, the Empire doesn't overtake them in these giant, more advanced ships and doesn't continue to attack with fighters as well as their cannons. You have to do something a little bit different with that. But the other half of it is you have to do something different with the one character that ran the bar. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but the yellow woman. Okay. They send a message to her, and she goes and finds this code breaker, and you're following her for a little bit of the film. Okay? And she's like, don't worry, I'll bring you the best code breaker I know. And so you're following her for a little bit. And, so you're actually getting something there. And it's a little bit different, and it's interesting, and it's compelling, and it actually makes sense. They're stuck on this ship. They can't simply send off a small ship like they do. And, yeah, that was a bit of a hard part for me, was they send off a small ship in the middle of this attack and go to a whole other planet and have an adventure, and it's like, well, why aren't you sending more people? Why aren't you... yeah. Okay, so getting away from all that, yeah, just basically, if you want to have Finn doing something, you could have him take his little sidekick and have them looking for where the tracer is aboard the fleet. That makes sense. That gives them something to do. Meanwhile, Poe is having this conflict with the Admiral as to what their plan is, and it doesn't seem like they have a real plan. And so, maybe there's this other character. Or maybe they do get the codebreaker, and the codebreaker is like, okay, well, oh, look, you found the tracer device, but it has an explosive on it. We need to be very careful removing it, so don't worry, I'll get this taken care of. And meanwhile, Rey is then aboard the Imperial ship, and Rey takes out the tracer. And it's just as the device is like getting the signal, and it is threatening to explode, and there are other ways that they could have written this story that would have been a little bit more compelling and a bit more interesting for the audience, because the audience is the most important player in the film, in the story. Whoever your audience is, they have to appreciate what you're telling them, what you're showing them. And instead, you're just left with what feels like a pile of crap. Anyway, so I'm sorry if this felt a bit disjointed. It was kind of just a vlog. But it's a hard film to sit through. It's not terribly enjoyable. And I just do not recommend it. It's not even so bad it's good. It's just bad. And the worst part is, it's really well made. And you have really great talent on board for it. And they just made it so bad. And I don't say that readily. I don't say that with any ease or any lightness in my heart. Just don't bother. Anyway, that wraps up this video. If you want to, please click like, please subscribe, and if you want to support my work financially, you can look me up on Patreon, username CladaYT. Thanks again for watching. Bye-bye.